Look who's driving. Tonight we're looking at underneath the hood at autonomous vehicles. And we're going to focus now on a conversation through thought leaders in the industry. What are the promises and perils of the technology and the economic and social implications of AI and self-driving? We've gathered a wonderful collection of panelists, and to introduce them, as is our tradition, let me share 5 numbers for each of these technology innovators, business leaders, and academic experts. First, Dmitry Dolgov. 2009, the year that Google began working on self-driving technology. 10 by 100, routes and miles driven around the Bay Area with no human intervention, which was one of the first project milestones in 2010. 10 million, the number of miles Waymo vehicles have driven on public roads. 20,000 virtual cars driving 24 hours a day inside Waymo's powerful simulator. And last but not least, 10 months, the age of his youngest child, Dmitry Dolgov. Next, Jesse Levinson from Zoox, 14 years working on autonomous driving, 1 million copies sold of his photography app that he created, 152.1, the average words per minute that he scored on typeracer.com. 5 numbers on this slide, 0 ducks he will eat in this lifetime. Jesse Levinson from Zoox. Jack Wiest from Mobileye and Intel, 20 years at Intel, 30 patents issued in his name. 2019, the year inducted into the Academy of Distinguished Alumni at Portland State University, $15.3 billion that Intel paid for Mobileye, and 4 minutes, 11 seconds of his favorite karaoke song, Jack Wiest. Chris Gerdes from Stanford, 27 years working on autonomous driving, under 50 miles per hour. Speed reached driving autonomously in the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah in 2009. 30 PhD graduates in his dynamic design lab at Stanford. First Chief Innovation Officer at the U.S. Department of Transportation. 1993, the year of his VW camper in his driveway. Chris Gerdes. Now to moderate this conversation, we're so pleased to partner with Nova to have a wonderful moderator, Talithia Williams from Harvey Mudd, professor there. 1.674 million downloads of her TED Talk, 6 episodes that she's hosted on Nova Wonders. 4, the time she wakes up in the morning. 2008, the year she finished her PhD and her first son was born. And 3, the number of sons. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to all of our speakers tonight. Here.
Hey, well, I am super excited to have the privilege to host these amazing superstars who you recognize from the film that you just saw. So I want to just take a second to allow them to introduce themselves, tell us a bit about the companies they work for, the center that they lead, how that came about, and sort of what those companies and what that center is doing. So start us off, please, Dmitry.
Thanks. Great to be here. I'm Dmitry Dolgov. I am the CTO of Waymo. I was also one of the people who founded back in those days, it was the Google self-driving car project in 2009. Before that, I worked a little bit on the self-driving technology as part of the DARPA Urban Challenge and as part of Stanford's team. And very excited to be here. It's been an incredible journey to see this technology progress from its earliest days of the DARPA Urban Challenge to then seeing it start to become reality as we took those cars to public roads, and we had our first fully driverless ride in 2015, and then seeing it actually become a product that people today are starting to use in Phoenix, Arizona to get around. We have more than 1,000 customers using our cars to get around. So it's been an incredible path.
Fantastic.
folks. I'm Jack Weiss from Intel, and many think Intel's a latecomer to this game, but if you noticed in the video, both the Boss and the Stanley vehicle both had a big Intel logo on the side of it. And so our company not only has a rich history here in the Valley, but also in the birth of this industry, contributing computing expertise and computing platforms to some of the early DARPA Challenge vehicles. I was honored to be part of the formation of the automated driving group at Intel to support many of the customers that are working in this space. And then recently, of course, we acquired Mobileye, a company that folks might not necessarily recognize the name, but many of you are driving vehicles with driver assistance technology every day that contain the technology from Mobileye, which is now a part of Intel. So we're honored to both be a supplier to this industry, both kind of driving the future, but also providing the technology that is saving lives every day today.
Thanks, Jack. Chris?
I'm Chris Gerdes. I actually started working with automated vehicles in 1992 when people had in mind a very different concept of automated highway systems. And this required actually at the time putting magnets in the road that the cars could follow. And the challenge with this was you had a chicken and egg problem, right? No one was going to build a highway for a car that didn't exist. No one was going to build a car for a highway that didn't exist. And so this idea really didn't go anywhere directly, although it did result in the radar and other systems that you see on your cars today. So it sort of was a precursor technology, but got me very interested in this. And now I'm at the Center for Automotive Research at Stanford and in the Mechanical Engineering Department. We focus on several things there. One is what we can do to improve the safety of automated vehicles, and then what are some of the broader mobility issues that automated vehicles bring up? What will be the impact on our society, and how can we help that to evolve in a positive direction?
Great, awesome. And last but not least, Jesse.
Hi, I'm Jesse, co-founder and CTO of Zoox. I've been working on self-driving cars for 14 years. Started at Stanford in 2005. I actually got to Stanford as a PhD student in computer science 1 week before the 2005 DARPA Grand Challenge, which was shown on here. And I thought it was cute that Stanford had a team because they had a very small team and not a lot of money, and they hadn't been in the 2004 race. So I thought there's no chance that Stanford's going to win, but like it's adorable that they're trying. And then they actually came in first place. I was like, wow, they must have done something well. Like what's going on here? And I was really, really excited to work on self-driving cars because of the impact it could have in so many different aspects of society at the same time. So when Sebastian Thrun came back from the Grand Challenge, I was like, hey, this is awesome. Like, can I work with you on basically anything? Because all the stuff he was working on was cool. And he's like, yeah. He's like, do you want to work on self-driving cars? I was like, oh my God, yes. Definitely want to work on self-driving cars. So I've been doing that the whole time. Got to work with Dimitri. There were only like 4 software engineers on our Stanford team back in 2007. It was a very small team. And I kept working on the technology because there was clearly a lot to do, but I really wanted to turn it into a product. And it wasn't obvious to me at the time what sort of form that product would eventually take. Would you sort of retrofit it onto cars, or would it be a new type of thing? And in 2014, I got an email out of the blue from my co-founder, Tim. He's like, hey, I'm Tim from Australia, and I have all these ideas about the future of autonomous driving and self-driving cars, and can we meet up? I'm like, okay, I didn't have much else to do. I was a postdoc. So we met up, and I knew he was a designer, so I was expecting to see sort of 3D renderings of concept cars, which he had, but what was much more interesting was he had this totally different idea for a vehicle that was designed from scratch to be fully autonomous and could move people from point to point in a city. And not only that, a very different business model. Instead of selling cars to people who buy them and use them 4% of the time, you could actually build a fleet of these things, and they could move people around all day long, which would be a much better use of resources for the environment and economically. So I got really excited, and we started a company to do that. And the company turned 5 a couple months ago, and we've made a lot of progress. There's still some work to do, but we're sort of all in on building a totally new type of vehicle to move people around cities autonomously.
Awesome, fantastic. So the way I've sort of thought about this panel tonight is sort of in 3 different sections. I really want us to think about sort of what the motivation is for this transformation as sort of the first third, and then maybe what some of the societal impacts are, how it might impact society, the people around us. And then the last part, we'll talk about the technology and how that technology might change us. And I also want to be the skeptic, so I want to represent you in this space and ask some of the tough questions. The first question I think I want to lead with is, when I think about transformative technology that we sort of use on a regular basis, like if you think about the telephone, where it started, maybe there was a call center, you call in to someone who connect you to someone else, to today where we can make a call literally on our watches. There's certain technology that we accept, but this seems like something like, why do we need a self-driving car? What's the reason behind it? Why? Given the danger that is possible from it.
I guess I would start with safety being, in my mind, the primary benefit. If we look at where we are today with human drivers, there's more than about 1.3 million people die on the roads worldwide every year. Just going to think about it, more than 1 million people every year. This is insane. The fact that we just accept it as a cost of moving around seems kind of crazy to me. That in of itself is, I think, a huge motivator that drives a lot of us in the industry. Beyond that, I think it can provide mobility to people who have a hard time getting around. Once there's enough adoption of these cars and we've reached a certain amount of scale, I think it can have a pretty profound impact on transportation and how we design cities. Right now, if you look around downtown areas, most of the really nice real estate is taken up by parking lots, right? And so cars just sit there around all day. An average car spends 95% of its lifetime just sitting around waiting for somebody to hop in and drive it. That's also kind of an insanely inefficient way to use cars. They're just insanely underutilized.
Awesome. Okay.
I think Dimitri did a great job, I think, summarizing all the benefits. I think an interesting question then is to ask, why isn't the public more accepting of this technology? Why aren't we more excited about it? I think there's a couple psychological factors to that. I think first, we're used to controlling these machines on a daily basis. We don't step onto an airplane and we're not nervous because we're not flying, right? Because we're not used to being pilots on a daily basis. So it's turning over, your life, right, to a machine. And I think when you think about trust, and even the definition of the word talks about, character, strength, and truth. These are things we don't often associate with machinery. And so I think as an industry, we really need to think about the human element of this story and understand how do we create a trust relationship between our passengers and the technology that's driving it. Because, we could have the most technically pure solution. It's provably safe, but if it's not psychologically safe and comfortable, then, even we and our own family and our own children, aren't going to step into these vehicles and go off for a ride.
What do you think it'll take to get us to that point of psychological safety?
Well, I think openness and transparency in terms of how the technology works, why we believe it's safe, I think is an important element of it. I think many of us in the panel here are also working with governments who play an important role in terms of helping them understand what we're trying to do and how we're doing it. And so I think our efforts to create industry standards that are open and transparent for everyone to see, to understand this is how the technology works and this is why we can trust in it and why we can believe in it.
Yeah. Chris, Jesse, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think one thing I'd like to add out there was a statistics that I ran across when I was at the Department of Transportation, and that was that 40% of taxi cab rides are taken by people with household incomes of less than $20,000. And now this is a slightly dated statistic, which doesn't take into account some of the ride-hailing companies, but I think it points to a central truth. There are a lot of people in our society who are severely limited because of their lack of transportation options. They don't have a car. They live in transit deserts. They have difficulty getting to work and the opportunity that provides. This sort of technology could potentially be offered at dramatically lower cost, right? If you start to think about mass-produced software, if you start to think about sensors produced at mass scale and duplicated without the need really for the labor costs of human drivers, you could offer mobility at an incredibly low price, and that could be a game changer. That could be a pathway to opportunity for a lot of people in our society who don't have it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious to hear what you all think it means for an automated vehicle to drive safely. and how we come up with that definition. I mean, when I think of driving in California, you know, it's deadly driving compared to driving in Georgia, where I grew up. Like, driving safely is, you know, 12 miles an hour so you can wave at your neighbors in Georgia. In California, when I drive like that, people tell me I'm number one. And, you know, and so, yeah. So when we're thinking about how self-driving cars are adjusting to the culture around us, how does that work into sort of the programming of it? How do we define safety in California and Georgia when driving looks so different in those places?
Well, it starts by being a good defensive driver. Right? Unlike humans, that's table stakes are don't get distracted, don't be on your phone, don't fall asleep, don't drive drunk. Right? And that's a start. That's not enough, because you have to share the environment with people who do all those things. Sure. So really, a lot of it comes down to being ready for that long tail of crazy things that can and do occur on our roads every day. People will run red lights, people will jaywalk, as you saw in the video, people will drive down the wrong way at various speeds. Even in low speed environments, you see in the 10 million miles that we've driven, we see people speed at kind of insane rates. So it is very important for a self-driving car to be ready for all of those things that unfortunately people do on roads today.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that the act of driving is inherently risky. You know, honestly, the safest automated vehicle is going to be the one that never leaves the garage, just like the safest human driver is the one that never drives. So if we don't accept a certain amount of risk as we go about our daily driving task, even we as humans are never going to get to our destination. And so the act of driving is inherently a balance between safety and usefulness or utility, whether it's getting to our destination or it's throughput or efficiency on the roadway. And we make compromises and trade-offs every day as human drivers. And so the question is, how do we translate that balance to a machine? And that's something that at Intel we've been doing to propose an industry standard that would provide a mathematical model that would allow you to set that balance. Because driving safely is cultural, as you point out. Driving safely in China means something very different than driving safely in the U.S. And even within the U.S., different cities and states have entirely different behaviors. So that level of balance between safety and usefulness varies culturally. And I think, again, this is where we go back to that human psychological element where we have to think about how can we make this machine more human-like and drive more naturalistically. Because I think if we can, then people will be more willing to accept it and even be more willing to be comfortable with those trade-offs.
Yeah.
I think Jack's exactly right in terms of thinking about the risk and the balance that we have between mobility and the possibility of crashes occurring. I mean, we take on risk when we move at the speeds that we move through the environment. This is inherent, and we can only reduce it so much. The challenge, though, is that we are not really thinking about this as we make our decisions. And when we program this into vehicles, we have to make these choices explicit. Mm-hmm. And that does become often a challenging conversation to people to have. How much of a risk are we willing to take in return for the mobility that we all enjoy?
Yeah, yeah.
You mentioned people drive differently in different places. That's absolutely true. The way we look at it is whatever domain we're driving in, we need to be significantly better than humans at not hitting things, hurting people, and killing people. Those are the three major statistics that we think are the most important. You come up with 1,000 statistics, but at the end of the day, if you are, hitting things more than people, that's not going to work. If you're hurting people more than people do, that's not going to work. If you're killing people, it's certainly not going to work, right? And so we try to get as much data as we can for any sort of type of driving or any type of geography. How well do humans drive there? And then we say we set a really significantly higher bar for ourselves, especially for collisions that would have been our fault. Yeah. But we also have to be better at not getting in crashes in the first place as well, because you could build a system that's really good at not causing crashes, but actually really bad at avoiding them. Mm-hmm. As we saw in the film, people do stupid things all the time. So a self-driving car has to be able to avoid other people's stupidity as well. Yeah. And if you don't mind, I just wanted to add to the first question, because we didn't get all the way down. Those were great answers, but one more thing that nobody mentioned, and I think is really important, is the environmental impact of driving. Now, everybody knows that electric cars are probably a good thing for the environment. And some people think, well, who cares about autonomous driving? That has nothing to do with the environment. Just make a lot of electric cars. That's actually not the full solution, because it turns out that the environmental impact of making a car is actually just as bad as driving it over its useful life. And so if you buy an electric car and you're like, I'm awesome, I drive an electric car, like that's great, good for you, except that if 96% of the time your car is sitting there depreciating and taking up space, there's a lot of stuff that went into your car. And most of the time nobody's using it. And so if you can build electric vehicles that move people around all day long, instead of just 4% of the time, you can make a lot less stuff, and that's also really important.
Yeah, great point. I want to segue us into sort of societal impact as well. Just a reminder, you've got note cards on your desk. So if you've got a question, please write that down, and we'll have time for question and answer from you as well. The film opens in Phoenix, and it opens with the tragic death of Elaine Hertzberg, who was struck by a self-driving Uber car while she was crossing the street at night. And so for people who might have already been on the fence or skeptics, this event, when it happened, sort of just turned people off to self-driving cars in general. I know some of the components of the car were disabled, the driver was distracted, but isn't that the reality that we will drive cars in? If I'm driving a self-driving car, the reality is that I'm probably going to be somewhat distracted or place too much confidence in the system. And so I'm just curious, how do we start to roll out automated vehicles, given that we would probably be a lot like this person behind the wheel of the Uber autonomous vehicle, distracted and inadvertently perhaps even causing accidents as we get to a place where we have a completely autonomous vehicle?
I think it's a really...
We can start, I'm sorry, let's start with Jeff.
Good point.
Sorry, yeah.
I think Dimitri and I will give a similar answer here, right? And I think the point here, and I mentioned that in the film, it's very hard, that handoff, right? If you're supposed to be kind of paying attention or even totally paying attention, but your car does the right thing 99.9% of the time, it's very hard to really be paying attention. Now, if it's your job to be paying attention, hopefully those folks will be paying attention most of the time, although that can go wrong too. So not having collision avoidance systems or filtering out objects is a really, really bad engineering choice. But fundamentally, if people buy cars and they work 99.9% of the time, it can be really hard for everybody to pay attention the whole time. And so our view is that the self-driving vehicle needs to be responsible for its own safety. The passenger shouldn't be even a little bit responsible for the safety, because I just don't think that's going to work very well in practice.
So unless we can get a level 5 vehicle.
Or 4. 4 is good.
Or 4.
4 is good,
Okay.
right? So 4 and 5, in both cases, the people in the vehicle aren't responsible for the safety of the vehicle.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, I think honestly, sometimes the discussion about public acceptance is a little bit overblown. You know, I don't, there's a lot of studies that say 3 out of 4 people won't get in an automated vehicle. It's like, well, where does that come from? They call up somebody on the phone. Yeah, they're waking up, huh? Who is this? It's a survey. Would you get in an automated vehicle? No, thank you. I mean, you know, these are all out of context, right? Nobody said, hey, right now, you can pick up your phone, you can dial your app, and at extremely low cost, a car will come and pick you up and take you to your destination. I bet 3 out of 4 people aren't saying, oh, no way. Don't give me that. So, I mean, ultimately, it really comes down to, are people feeling that this is safe, right? Are the people offered value from this technology? If people get something from it and they believe that it's safe, it will be incredibly popular and adopted. And if, in fact, there are challenges and people feel it isn't safe or has to be limited or they're not getting value from it, then it won't be adopted. But I think really it ultimately boils down to the value proposition.
And I think people's firsthand experience with the technology is also going to go a long way to build that trust. And I think the number of new vehicles today that contain driver assistance technologies, the kind that Jesse was talking about, are still pretty small in this country in particular. But I think as we get used to the technology on a daily basis, that's the foundation, you know, that you need for level 4 and 5. Phil did a good job of talking about how level 1 and 2 are driver assistance. As Jesse said, the driver is still in control, but the car can assist you and make you a better and safer driver. And as we start to value the technology's role in making us better, then at some point I think we'll become more comfortable with the technology and be more So I'm just going to turn it over to you.
You want to add to that?
I agree with what my colleagues said. I think the point, actually, the point that Jesse made first about the fundamental difference between levels, 1, 2, and 3 on one hand, and 4 and 5 on the other, I think is critical. We actually, in our project around 2012, 2013, actually ran an experiment where we had a freeway driver assist system. It was a pretty good level 3 autonomy system, but we had a lot of challenges with this problem of handover. People got comfortable very quickly. They would do all kinds of crazy things. Somebody fell asleep. Somebody would start putting makeup. Somebody crawled into the back seat to mess with their laptop. So that's what really to a large extent cause us to pivot and pursue full autonomy, level 4, and eventually level 5 autonomy. So I think that's key. In terms of adoption, we are finding that education and experience with this technology goes a really, really long way. And if you're, as Chris was saying, if you have no experience with this technology, if you're not, if you don't have visibility into really the details of the question, it's not really a great statistic. I think there's some interesting statistic from like around 2000 where there was a survey that people conducted and asked, how many people would ever use a cell phone? Not a smartphone, but a cell phone. And the vast majority of people said, like, no, why would I need one? Well, look at us today.
Yeah, exactly. Chris, I believe you touched on this before, but how might we prevent maybe a driverless divide where those of us that are wealthy, have access, we can summon a car, we can nap in it on our way to work, whereas those without access are maybe on public transportation that's slow, crowded freeways. I mean, what do we do to sort of address the potential inequity that might come with that? And that's for everyone, but I know you.
Yeah, no, I think it's an important question, and I think there is a role for government in this process. I don't think that the government is going to be able to get out in front of all the technological development and guide that. I think industry is spending a huge amount of money on this. And when was the last time you saw this sort of investment in transportation? Right? Usually you're scrounging to get money for that. And that's a fantastic thing. But what I think government can do is to guide, and these are public roadways, right? These are paid with all taxpayers' funds, and I think there needs to be some level of service requirements as these technologies roll out to make sure that they are broadly available. And there's a challenge with that, though, because obviously you're going to want to roll out these technologies in areas that have good infrastructure, right? The easiest places are going to be where you want to go first because those are going to be the ones where you can make profit and deploy safely. But often lower income communities are the ones from lack of infrastructure. And this actually results in increased pedestrian and bicycle fatalities in these, but they also may make them more challenging for automated vehicles, or at least require that you provide a certain level of service in the city.
Yeah.
I actually think that this technology is one of the best ways to make transportation more equitable because of the fact that the business model is so different, right? If you can amortize the cost of a vehicle over people using it and paying for it all day long, you can significantly lower the cost of mobility, and you can also increase pooling, right? And our vehicle, for example, is designed to make it really easy and actually nice to carpool. Very few people are excited to get in the middle seat of the back of a Prius, and our vehicle, we have 2 seats facing 2 seats and sliding doors on either side, so it's actually not such a bad thing. And so if we can lower the cost of mobility and get more people in the same vehicle, that's going to actually expand access to transportation to people who might otherwise not even be able to afford to get to work safely. And so I think this is one of the best technologies to do that.
Maybe I'll just add one thing to that is where I think this technology can also be a nice connector to other forms of public transportation. A lot of people today have challenges getting to the bus station or to the train station. And we actually ran a pilot with Valley Metro in Phoenix where we're using our cars to connect people in some communities to public transportation. And I think there's a part of this technology in those use cases as well.
Great. So let's say hypothetically I'm driving late at night, it's dark, I'm in an auto vehicle, it's taking me home, and some crazed maniac who's watched my TED Talk 20 times jumps out. It's Talithia Williams. I recognize you. I'm about to get you. And my car stops because it's not going to hit a pedestrian. And I'm like, run this guy over now.
Whoa.
You know, hypothetically.
Not expecting it to go in that direction.
Or don't stop. But seriously, let's say, you know, if danger jumps in front of you, maybe it's not that you're going to hit and attack you, or maybe there's domestic violence and I'm trying to get away and this person is in front of me and I really want to move, or I'm an elderly person or a teenager alone in a car I don't want to stop in. Or the car and pray. So this situation is going to happen, and I'm just curious.
Well, at least,
how do I run over the man?
At least it's not going to let you. at least it's not going to let you murder
My husband
someone.
wants to know. My husband has asked to make sure. No.
I would imagine that most people developing this technology have some type of an emergency button in the vehicle. We certainly have an emergency button to a ride operator who's remote, who's at the interior, and that can help people be safe. Otherwise, the vehicle doors are locked from the outside.
And then we're trying to get technology, right? It's about transportation. I think there are enough of us out there without, creating more here. I wish my car would go and do an awful lot of things. At the end of the day, if it provides transportation, I'm more than happy.
I was sitting next to the president, and we were talking about this before, and I said, I hope we get a question I've never heard before. So there you go.
Happy to do my part. Chris, in the film, there's a conversation around how some see the future where cars should be able to talk to each other. And you make a point that inexpensive mobility could actually lead to dramatic consumption of mobility. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I think I got the second half of my sentence talking about the optimistic scenario, and then I guess my billing is the least pessimistic academic. I really think it could go either way. And so, the Department of Energy studied this closely a number of years ago and said that they're pretty confident automated vehicles would either decrease energy use by 40% or double it. And so,
that's a lot of confidence.
So it's like, there we go, right? It could go. And so I think there are a lot of directions that it could go. And there's really nothing about the technology that suggests it will go in a bad direction. We just need to be thoughtful about it. We need to have technologies that do encourage ride sharing and make that a good experience, that can reduce the cost per mile and can be thoughtful about the environmental impact. It's really amazing if you start to look at very lightweight electric vehicles that don't crash, and you start to look at how much energy it takes to move them around a city environment at 20 to 25 miles an hour. Actually, bicycling begins to look like the unsustainable choice. Now, not if you eat lower on the food chain, organic, then you're unbeatable. But with the average U.S. diet and its petroleum use, you could actually get things that would be more environmentally sustainable than cycling.
Wow.
Something to aspire to.
Yeah.
You also talk about using evasive maneuvers in the film, similar to race car drivers. I'm ready for that. But that's not how many people sort of naturally drive, maybe in California, but the rest of the world, perhaps not. And so I'm curious, how do you anticipate people responding to that in the moment? And if my car does something evasive,
well, I would imagine that the vast majority of people who ride in autonomous vehicles never experience that,
okay.
Right? And so it's really fun when you do it on the test track with the burning tires and the high friction. It's great. It dispels all rumors that electric vehicles need to be environmentally friendly. It really is fun research to do. The thing is, though, if you start to think about the vehicle and look at it as it was maneuvering, it looks like it's gliding over the surface. And so if you start to think about some of the icy and snowy roads that were shown in the film, and you start to think about driving on gets you out of harm's way.
Dimitri, you guys have an early riders program where customers can test drive. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's a program that we've been running in Phoenix since 2018, and we have over 1,000 people who are using our cars to get around. They take them to work, to school, to run errands, and we are starting to give completely driverless rides to members of the public, and the experience there is, you have a phone app, you call a car, one of the cars in the fleet shows up, it's completely empty, you tell it where you want to go, and then it takes you on a ride and drops you off, and that's kind of where we are now.
Awesome. And are you taking applications for people who might want to pilot that?
We are. Yes, we are. Waymo.com, I think.
Awesome. The film talks about how self-driving cars, before we transition into technology, can provide mobility for people who wouldn't ordinarily have a chance to drive. Elderly folks in low-income neighborhood, young people who aren't able to drive. Is this how you see autonomous vehicles really just revolutionizing society?
I'd offer that I think you can take the problem and separate it into two pieces. I think there's the safety part of the revolution in terms of trying to eliminate as many of these fatal and serious injury accidents that humans cause every day by us being behind the wheel. And I think a lot of that problem could potentially be solved by really advanced driver assistance. So far greater than the kinds of level 2 systems we see today, but where the human is still in charge of the driving task, but it's very, very difficult for you to get into an accident because the technology is so advanced. But then I think you have the societal transformation piece, and this is where I think Dimitri mentioned, parking lots now become parks. People who have never had the opportunity for mobility suddenly can get around. I just talked to my dad, just had knee surgery, and he said, I can't drive for 4 weeks. What am I going to do? And for him, in a small retirement community where you have to drive to everything, that is a loss of mobility, And so it's a simple example, but you think about people who are blind. Waymo did a drive there in Austin with that. People with other disabilities, I think it's potentially life-changing, bringing those people into the workforce, giving them a sense of freedom and a connectedness to society that they haven't had before. Mm-hmm. And so I think even if we can make human-driven vehicles much safer than we can today, which I think we can, I think there's still this opportunity to provide significant additional societal benefits in the ways that you're asking about.
The issue of privacy. So maybe I don't want you to know where I'm going. I don't want you to know I stop at Whole Foods and the donut shop on the way home.
They do sell donuts at Whole Foods.
They're healthy. They're vegan. No, I want How can we protect our freedom as consumers? How can we own our data? Because technically, in theory, those trips are logged. You know where I'm going. They're controlled by authorities. I may be wanted, and you're like, Talithia's in the car, just tell it to come straight to the police station. And I'm like, where are we going? Let me out. I tried to come up with some great questions for this. But privacy would become an issue because now we can see what we're doing, where we're going when we shouldn't be going, where we're going, like the donut shop. So curious to hear.
I think it's a really good question. Privacy is really important. We take it at Waymo very, very seriously. We have our privacy policy that makes it very, very clear of what data we use and how we use it. And we find that a lot. It's very important to be transparent about it, and then also have very strict and clear policies about the use of that data.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you have your cell phone on, the government already knows where you are, for better or for worse. So you're not as anonymous as you probably think you are. No, but Dimitri's right. I mean, you have to be upfront about what you're going to do with that data. Customers have absolutely deserve to know what that data is going to be used for. Now, the good news, incidentally, with transportation is that there's a viable business model there without having to monetize people's private information, right? already pay to get moved around cities. They pay a lot, actually. So I don't think the temptation to monetize people's private data will be as great as it might be in some other industries like search and search with.
I want to take some of your questions. Jack, you have said that, quote, industry collaboration on the safety of automated vehicles is a key to realizing a safe and responsible autonomous future. Why does it matter that we're not developing this technology in silos?
Yeah, I think even if we come back to this question of what does it mean to drive safely, when we get a driver's license as a human, we're assessed to a common definition. We have explicit traffic rules, but then we also have this sort of implicit rules of good behavior, following distance, and are we being cautious, and that we have a common definition for the industry of what does it mean for these machines to drive safely in a culturally relevant way, so that while we have robust competition in the market, which is a good thing, we also have, particularly for governments, a way to commonly assess the performance of these vehicles to know that they're all equally safe on the road. Some may get you to your destination more quickly. Some might be able to operate in adverse weather where others may not. Some may have an espresso machine inside versus a movie theater. Who knows, right? But they should all be equally safe. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an area where safety is something that, while the auto industry has competed on safety for the last century, frankly, I think for our industry today, safety is something that shouldn't be a differentiator. Safety is something that should be common, that we should collaborate on together and openly with the public and government so we can arrive at a common definition of what exactly that means.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Go for it.
I don't 100% agree. I would love to get to the point where all vehicles are so safe it's not even worth talking about it. The reality is today, human-driven vehicles are quite unsafe, right? We've said repeatedly tonight, over 100 Americans die in car crashes. So there's actually a long way to go between that and nobody ever dies. There's a long way to go. And I don't think as an industry we can get to perfection, because then by definition you'll never get there because you don't have anything. The time you're very thoughtful and cautious of how you deploy the technology. So I do think there will actually be a period of time where safety is one of the differentiators among people working on this technology. I think competition on safety is a good thing if it drives people to build safer and safer products. Now again, there needs to be a minimum bar. It's already much safer than humans. But I hope we don't stop there. I hope we keep pushing it further and further on safety until we get as close to possible as that ever happening.
Yeah. I'd love to hear you all tell us a bit about what happens sweep the environment to form a 3D representation. Tell the audience more about that technology. Dimitri.
Sure. So at a very high level, LiDAR will shoot out beams of light. Those beams of light will hit something, and then they will come back, and by measuring the time of flight, typically, you can tell how far that object that you happen to hit is. And then, of course, you don't shoot out one beam of light, you shoot out millions of these pulses of light per second, and jointly, they give you this 3D picture of the world that gives you fine 3D, precise 3D information about the objects around you. Oftentimes you don't get just the information about how the distance to the point. You also get very useful information back about certain physical characteristics of that point that you happen to hit. And oftentimes you also get multiple returns. Imagine if there's fog or rain, you can get a simple return from a droplet of water and then a stronger return. So all of that information is very useful for basically finding stuff in the environment, and also making decisions, classification decisions about what those different objects are based on their 3D shape, as well as those physical characteristics of the returns that you're getting. It's a really nice sensor because, well, A, it measures shape directly in 3D. And secondly, it's an active sensor, so it brings its own source of light. So LiDARs work really, really well at night. So imagine driving in pitch dark, where human eyes, as great as they are in terms of high dynamic range and resolution, the light is not there for you to see. And with LiDAR, they see just as well at night as they do during the day.
And is that the technology that all of you use in your companies or in your center?
I think with our Mobileye division in particular, so we've got a strength in computer vision, and so I think it's important, while it's important to have multiple different kinds of sensors for safety, certainly, cameras are unique in the sense that they're very low cost, and they have the unique ability to see both shape and texture in the sense that they can see outlines of objects, but they can also read words on the road, on signs, things like that. So I think in the end, a combination of different sensing technologies is really the right way to do it. And the more you can have redundancy between different kinds of sensors, between cameras, radars, and LiDARs, the safer the vehicle is going to be, because the greater chance that you have to identify objects and track them over time. Yeah.
We also do a lot with GPS sensors, both for location but also for velocity. And it can tell us not only the direction we're traveling, the speed, but also the direction at which we're traveling, which if you're going sideways, it's pretty important to distinguish from going forward. Obviously, GPS can get blocked if you can't see the satellites, but it can be very useful for calibrating other sensors, other parts of your vehicle when you do have that availability. So that's one that we use a lot.
Fantastic.
Yeah, the LiDAR signal is really important, and you can come up with things that LiDAR can't do, which is totally fair, but that's exactly why you need multiple types of sensor modalities. Like, there is no individual sensor modality combined with any known type of artificial intelligence that exists so far that by itself can drive as safely as humans. In fact, we're not even very close to that. But if you have multiple sensor modalities that each have strengths, and the good news is their weaknesses aren't particularly strongly correlated. If you combine them together, you can actually start getting all those nines that you need to drive safer than humans.
My last question to you before I pick some questions from our audience is, can you sort of paint a picture of how you envision a person here tonight would actually be using your autonomous vehicle, say, in another 5 years?
5 years, huh?
I'm trying to
not unlike how I got here tonight. I was in my office, and then I needed to get here. I pulled out my phone, I called one of our cars, I got in, and it dropped me off right around the corner. So I think that's going to be a common way to get around for more and more people around the world in 5 years.
I'd agree. I think in truth, though, robotaxis, I think, are, as they're commonly called, I think are definitely going to lead the way. Level 4 vehicles in particular, I think before we'll have this in personally owned vehicles. So I think we can continue to enjoy better driver assistance systems in our vehicles that we drive. But I think for many of us, our first experience is going to be in a ride-hailing service, just as Dimitri described.
I think the work that we are doing at the limits of handling will probably not be something that most people encounter unless, they have an accident or unless somebody decides to program donut mode.
We did race a Prius around the parking lot. Like, racing a fast car is easy. Try racing a Prius.
Dude, have you ever worked with a DeLorean?
They're heavy.
Jesse's like, it's my turn. We'll wrap it up.
No, but speaking of the crazy maneuvers, right? So our vehicle has, it's bidirectional and has four-wheel steering. So, and actually one of Chris's former PhD student runs our motion planning and motion control team. And so what we can do is with the two steering axes, we can control the vehicle twice as accurately as you can with just one steering rack. And we've actually shown that on our vehicles on test tracks doing some of these similar kind of crazy maneuvers. You can get incredible control, which it looks awesome, but the reason it's important is, again, in those dangerous situations, you can control the vehicle more accurately. But no, I agree with Dimitri's answer. I think that's how people are going to use this technology by and large, is you kind of use it the way you use Uber and Lyft, right? And the nice thing is people have made it very clear that they want point-to-point transportation in cities. That's not a debate anymore. We can just offer a better version of that that's going to be safer, cleaner, more repeatable, more reliable, and also more affordable.
Awesome. Okay, I want to try to get through as many of these as possible, so maybe one or two people respond, and then we'll go through. Question one, if the default error handling behavior is to stop the vehicle, could the resulting road rage from non-autonomous vehicles make roads less safe?
I think if autonomous vehicles are stopping all the time because they can't handle a lot of situations, and there's a lot of problems with that, absolutely. I mean, yes, the vehicle should come to a safe stop if it doesn't know what it's doing, but if that happens very often, then we're just not ready to deploy the technology.
Great. Okay.
Oftentimes the right answer is to pull over, right? It depends on the air, right? If your wheel fell off, like the best thing is just all the time is not the right answer. The right answer is to get into a safe situation.
Yes. We will hack the ethics of the software. What kind of is this question?
Sounds like you asked that question.
I don't know. This is my handwriting.
To clarify a misconception, I think that comes up a lot with ethics and automated vehicles. You know, there is, and I actually have to credit this to Shannon Bauer, who's a professor at Santa Clara University. There is no like ethics module in the car. It's like you can't go to Nietzsche mode if you want. It really, ethical programming is a process. It's the way that you approach the design. It's the way that you think about safety. It's the decisions that you make in the design process. So that's not really hackable. You know, it really is the culture of the organizations and the decisions that engineers are making and the way that you incorporate human values in there.
Yeah. How can an automated car compete in cost and affordability with public transportation?
The cost will go down, as we discussed, but I don't think it's one or the other. As we've discussed, I think public transportation is great. I think the buses are wonderful. Load a lot of people, and trains are amazing, right? So I think it's going to be a multimodal transportation system. So these autonomous vehicles, especially the ones that are well suited for local transportation, like small electric vehicles, could be great to delivering it to public transit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's sort of the last mile problem. There's a lot of people that would be happy to take public transportation if only it would pick them up outside their house, right? And so if you had a solution to take them from their front door to the station, which is probably only a mile away, then I think you actually may see an increase in public transportation ridership because you've got a multimodal transportation system now.
Awesome. Next question. What do you do when the legal rules, say speed limit 25 miles per hour, doesn't match the real California streets? When humans might be driving at 30 or 35 miles per hour, who wins? And is the automation producer legally at risk?
Well, I think that's why we really think that this is an important conversation we need to have openly and transparently, because I think if you have an automated vehicle on the road that everybody's annoyed with and that you don't want on the road, that's causing more congestion, then, we're doing something wrong. And I think that's where we might have to have some open conversations with the public and government about how should these vehicles be allowed to drive and what kind of expectations are reasonable for the vehicles to assume. If you think about a simple scenario where an automated vehicle is following another car, if the automated vehicle has to, essentially guarantee that it would never rear-end crash, you have to think about what is the maximum deceleration of that vehicle that I'm following. And so are you following a Formula One car or a 20-year-old? Braking capabilities for vehicles vary widely. And so if you assume the theoretical maximum worst case, the automated vehicle may have a 10-vehicle length following distance. Nobody wants that car on the road, right? So now we're not actually contributing to a public good in terms of reducing the safety. We're delivering vehicles that drive everybody crazy. And so that's where, again, we have to go back to this balance between safety and risk and figure out what is a naturalistic way for vehicles to drive. And sometimes that might mean, in certain well-defined scenarios, that you violate a traffic rule because it's customary to do so.
Awesome. We've got an amazing 8-year-old out there named Krish who says, how can you honk in level 5 cars? Or can you even do so? When do you think there will be a level 5 car? It's a great question.
So we have a cool answer to that one. And it's an important question, right? So what we've done is we've put a 32-beam speaker array on each front of our vehicle. And we use something called beamforming to actually be able to shoot sound in any direction we want. And this is really cool because if we want to alert somebody, let's say somebody looks like they're about to jump in front of the vehicle, instead of honking a horn, which is really obnoxious and actually scares a bunch of people, we can actually send sound directly at that person, and it's all in the loop with our AI system. So the perception system detects the person, the prediction system, says, hey, it looks like they might be jumping out from the vehicle. And then the directional audio says, okay, let's shoot some sound over there. And then they can hear that sound, and hopefully they'll get out of the way. Of course, we're also going to stop at the same time, but all these different ways to get more safety. And then everybody else probably didn't even hear anything at all, which is pretty cool.
Awesome, awesome. Next question. Parents teach their children from a young age to establish eye contact with a driver before they cross a vehicle's path. How are they going to learn this behavior? How will it be replicated when there is no driver? How are kids off the street when you just step out there and be like, it's programmed not to hit you?
The reason why people are trained to do that is that sometimes drivers just aren't paying attention.
Sure.
Right? These vehicles better be paying attention. In fact, one of the key advantages of this technology is that their sensor systems are always tracking all the objects 360 degrees around the vehicle. So you actually don't need to make sure that there's a driver paying attention to you because the vehicle's already doing that.
So you all would step out in front of a car is what I hear you saying. Is that? All right, I'm going to take a poll at the end. Somebody wants to know, what are the Russians and Chinese doing in this field, and other countries, but what's happening?
I think I can only speak to what the Russians are doing in this country.
Next question.
Woo! At what rate do autonomous vehicles randomly reboot?
Well, we use Windows 95, so pretty much most of the time.
Actually, our very first
Too soon?
we actually had a self-steering Corvette, and we actually ran on a real-time version of DOS. We did not deploy this on the road. To be clear.
Someone wants to know, realistically, when will it be 100% safe? We will all be dead and gone. No,
Yeah, if you mean error-free, then I think I'm very confident saying the answer is never.
Is there consensus? Ooh.
Yeah, no, I go ahead, Dimitri.
I guess 100% safe is in this environment. It's not designed to absolutely guarantee safety. At some point, you can't beat physics, right? Somebody, imagine you're driving at some speed, and there's an oncoming car. There's cars parked on the side of the road, and just somebody jumps out right in front. Like at some point, physics takes over, and there's just not any action that you can take. So I think the goal is to anticipate that, and we design our cars to be defensive so that they can be as ready for these kinds of situations, but 100% guarantees are in this environment unless we change something about the environment. I don't think it's.
I think it's back to the comment that Jack made earlier as well in terms of this trade-off between what is sort of the acceptable risk and what mobility do we get from it. And we if you dial the system all the way and say well, first of all, is it even possible to design an engineered system that has zero errors? I don't think that's ever happened. But if you take a look at the case where you will never have a crash ever, we may not be happy with the mobility that produces. That may be exactly the car that people are concerned about producing road rage.
Yeah. I think the problem is if the goal is zero, then we're still killing 1 million people a year in human-driven vehicles. And I think we should all think that's unacceptable. And so I think certainly the goal is to get as low to zero as possible, but that's where we shouldn't let perfect be enemy of the great.
Great. My last question is your one-word question. So if you want to get ready for that. As part of CHM's One World initiative, each of our panelists was asked to write down one word of advice for an aspiring entrepreneur. And so I would like to know if you can share your one word of advice and the story behind why you chose it. Dimitri. Dun, 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 dun. Drum roll. Do you have a drum roll?
Yeah, and I was told that handwriting is not a factor in
Yeah, we're not grading, although it's not bad, it's clear.
You're going to show yours?
No, I didn't want to abstain.
That was a high bar.
At least it's not in Russian, so you're doing
I was tempted. So the word that I picked is tenacity. As I was thinking about this question, I reflected on the first couple of years of our project at Google in 2009, 2010, when we embarked on this task that most of the world or the industry, although there's not an industry to speak of at the time, thought was kind of crazy. And it was a lot of work to accomplish our initial milestones, and the problem, honestly, has only been getting harder since then. So as I was reflecting on how I could capture some of my experiences and what I learned from it, there were a few words that came to mind, but I just, ended up going with tenacity. And from the following reason, in terms of advice, I think it can guide you in terms of picking an area of study or an area that you want to focus in your career, and usually the things that are worth spending your time on and investing energy into are tend to be not the easiest things out there, and you really need some tenacity to get through that. So that's number one. Number two is that I find that you grow the most and you learn the most as you tackle the most difficult problems, and that learning and that growth is highly nonlinear as a function of the complexity of the task, and you have to try a lot of ideas and really exercise your creativity before you find the one that works, and it's this process that really leads to a lot of I think learning and personal growth. And finally, the last thing, if you kind of think about that feedback cycle of reward to your effort, I think in my experience been that it's really solving these most difficult problems after a lot of work is that what leads to kind of a lot of fulfillment and a lot of reward. And not just that, you actually find yourself in a situation, at least that's been my experience, where you get to work with some of the most amazing, the most interesting people, and you also just have a lot of fun along the way.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Dimitri. Jack, tell us what your one word is and why you chose it.
So my word is love, and what I meant by this is you've got to love what you do. And so my story in this space is I started out as a music major before I got into computer science. From a very young age, my job, my career, my profession was supposed to be music, music performance, teaching, classical piano, whatever. But as soon as I was in practicing, I would run over to the computer, get my compute magazines, look at the code listings, and enter them in, and taught myself how to program, because that's what I love to do. And I guess I didn't realize for a long time until I actually got into my undergraduate work that you can do what you love to do for a profession, and I'm living proof of that, and so that would be my advice to anyone out there who has a hobby, a passion, a pursuit that you love to do. It is possible to do that and wake up every day and get paid really well for it.
Yeah. I hope you brought your resume. Chris, tell us what your word is, why you chose it.
So my word is voyage. And I went through a process a few years ago with a friend of mine from high school that I hadn't talked to in a while, and he was working on this project about intentional differences, about people he thought were very intentional about the way they spent their time pursuing the sorts of things that they loved. And the part of the process was to reduce yourself to one word, and my word was voyager. And I want to share the word voyage in the sense that I think life is a voyage of discovery, both personal and professional. And my advice to a young entrepreneur would be to be present and a little bit patient with yourself on that voyage.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Jesse, what was your word?
Why? So I have sort of two reasons for this. The first is I think it's very important to ask questions and be inquisitive in just about everything you do in life. Wonder, why are things the way they are? Does it make sense? Could they be different? Could they be better? I think people go through the vast majority of their lives just taking things for granted and not wondering, why are things this way, right? How could they be? And I think the more you ask this question, the more interesting you'll become, and the more creative you'll be, and the more good ideas you'll have. And the other reason, because this was phrased as advice for aspiring entrepreneurs, is ask yourself why you're doing something, and if the answer is that you want to be an entrepreneur, that is a really bad reason, personally, in my opinion. I think there's a little bit of a culture here in Silicon Valley where entrepreneurship is sort of idolized. You're like, oh, I have to start a company, and it's like, no, you don't. Don't go start a company. Don't go start a company unless there's something that you really, really want to do, and it makes sense why it should exist, and there's a need for it, and you have this great idea, and this is the thing, like, you just can't stop thinking about it. And that's a good reason to start a company. And it still probably won't work, but you should try, right? Mm-hmm. But if you don't ask why, if you don't have a really good answer to that question, and if you're doing it because you think it's cool, or you're going to make money, or it's what people do, you should keep asking this question until you come up with a better answer.
Yeah. Would you give our amazing panelists a round of applause?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're short on microphones. We'll belong on an applause.